The courthouse records in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, tell of 4 separate deaths between 1837 and 1841. An attorney who fell from his horse on a foggy morning, a banker found drowned in the shallow waters of Mill Creek, a circuit judge who succumbed to sudden illness during harvest season, and a county sheriff discovered at the bottom of his own well. What these records don't reveal is that all 4 men were married to sisters from the same Irish Catholic family, and that each death occurred within 18 months of their respective weddings. The Brennan sisters, Bridget, Catherine, Margaret, and Sarah, had inherited the largest farm in Lancaster County, and they would kill to keep it whole. Before we continue with the story of the Brennan family farm and the 4 widows who refused to be separated, let me tell you about the summer of 1836, when everything changed for the Brennan sisters, and a conversation by candlelight sealed the fate of 4 prominent men. The Brennan family farm stretched across 847 acres of Pennsylvania's most fertile soil, bordered by Mill Creek to the north and the Lancaster Pike to the south. Patrick Brennan, who had arrived from County Cork with nothing but determination and a hatred of English landlords, had spent 37 years building his American dynasty. By 1836, his property was worth more than most small towns, complete with a grand stone house that rivaled any in Philadelphia, barns that could shelter 200 head of cattle, and grain silos that fed half the county through harsh winters. But Patrick Brennan died that October with a problem that would have destroyed lesser families: the law. Pennsylvania inheritance statutes dictated that a man's property be divided equally among his children upon death. Patrick had no sons. His 4 daughters, Bridget, 28, Catherine, 26, Margaret, 24, and Sarah, 21, faced the prospect of watching their father's life work carved into worthless fragments, sold off to satisfy creditors and tax collectors. The sisters had grown up knowing this day would come. Patrick had drilled into them the importance of the land, telling them stories of their grandfather's eviction from Irish soil, of families scattered to the winds when property changed hands. "Land is not just dirt and stones," he would say, his accent still thick after decades in America. "Land is your blood, your future, your very soul. Lose the land, and you lose everything that makes you who you are." Lancaster County in 1836 was a place where such sentiments carried weight. The German and Irish farmers who had settled there understood the sacred nature of property ownership in a way that newer Americans, those whose families had always owned land, never could. But understanding the importance of keeping land and actually managing to do so were 2 very different challenges. The Brennan sisters were not ordinary farm women. Bridget, the eldest, possessed a sharp intelligence that she had learned to hide behind demure smiles and downcast eyes. She could calculate compound interest faster than most bankers, and had been secretly managing the farm's books since her father's eyesight began failing. Catherine had inherited her father's gift for reading people, for sensing their weaknesses and desires with an almost supernatural precision. Margaret possessed an ethereal beauty that made men forget their own names, combined with a ruthless practicality that her angelic face concealed perfectly. Sarah, the youngest, had been blessed with a voice that could charm birds from trees, and a talent for playing whatever role the situation demanded. Together, they formed a conspiracy of survival that would make Lancaster County history, though the true nature of their conspiracy would remain hidden for nearly a century. The plan emerged during the long nights following their father's funeral, when the sisters gathered in the kitchen by lamplight to confront their future. The property taxes alone would consume their savings within 2 years. Marriage, the traditional solution for propertyless women, would scatter them to different households, different names, different loyalties. But what if marriage could serve their purposes instead of destroying them? "We stay together," Bridget declared on a November evening when frost covered the windows and the fire cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. "Whatever it takes, we stay together, and we keep the farm whole." "The law says differently," Margaret pointed out, ever practical. "The law," Catherine said slowly, "can be influenced. It was Sarah who spoke the words that would damn them all. Men die, sisters. Husbands die, and widows inherit everything. The first death occurred on March 15th, 1838, just 14 months after Patrick Brennan's funeral and 6 months after Bridget's marriage to Thomas Hennessy, the most prominent attorney in Lancaster County. Hennessy had been a logical choice. A successful Irish Catholic lawyer in his early 40s, a widower with no children, a man wealthy enough to pay the Brennan property taxes without blinking, and influential enough to help restructure the family's legal obligations. Their courtship had been brief but intense. Hennessy, who had been a bachelor for 3 years since his first wife's death from consumption, found himself completely enchanted by Bridget's combination of beauty and intelligence. She could discuss legal precedents with the same ease that she planned elaborate dinner parties. She laughed at his stories of courtroom victories and listened intently to his dreams of running for county judge. Within 2 months of their first meeting at Sunday Mass, Thomas Hennessy was convinced that Bridget Brennan was the answer to his lonely prayers. The wedding took place in December 1837, a grand affair that announced to Lancaster County society that the Brennan family fortunes were secure. Hennessy moved into the stone farmhouse, bringing with him not only his considerable wealth, but also his legal expertise in restructuring the property ownership to benefit all 4 sisters. The arrangement was complicated but legal, a family trust that kept the land intact while providing for each sister's future security. But Thomas Hennessy had underestimated his new wife's true priorities. Within weeks of the wedding, he began to notice disturbing patterns. Bridget seemed more interested in her sister's welfare than in their marriage. She insisted that Catherine, Margaret, and Sarah continue living in the main house, turning what should have been a honeymoon period into an extended family gathering. When Hennessy suggested that newlyweds might benefit from privacy, Bridget's response was swift and cold. "My sisters are my blood, Thomas. They stay." The tension escalated when Hennessy discovered that Bridget had been using his legal connections to investigate the financial situations of several prominent Lancaster County bachelors. When confronted, she claimed she was merely looking out for her sisters' futures, but Hennessy sensed something more calculating in her behavior. The morning of March 15th began with an argument. Hennessy had received an offer to purchase a law practice in Philadelphia, an opportunity that would advance his career considerably, but require leaving Lancaster County. When he presented the idea to Bridget over breakfast, her reaction was immediate and vehement. "We're not leaving," she stated flatly, not looking up from her porridge. "This is our future, Bridget. A chance to build something bigger than a country law practice. Our future is here. This land, this farm, my sisters. Your sisters can visit us in Philadelphia. They can even come live with us once they're married." Bridget finally looked at him, and Hennessy later told his law clerk that her expression had frightened him. "You don't understand, do you, Thomas? We don't leave. We don't separate. Ever." The argument continued as Hennessy prepared to ride to his office in Lancaster town. The morning was thick with fog, unusual for March but not unprecedented in Pennsylvania's unpredictable spring weather. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices from the Brennan house, though the fog muffled the specific words. At approximately 9:30 that morning, Thomas Hennessy's horse returned to the farmhouse without its rider. The animal was sweating heavily, its eyes wide with what appeared to be terror. Bridget immediately organized a search party, her distress appearing genuine and overwhelming. They found Hennessy's body 3 hours later, sprawled beside the main road approximately half a mile from the farm, his neck broken from what appeared to be a catastrophic fall from his horse. The county coroner, Dr. James McAllister, conducted a thorough examination. The injuries were consistent with a fall from horseback, a broken neck, contusions on the skull, and bruising that suggested the horse had stepped on Hennessy's chest after throwing him. The fog would have made the familiar road treacherous, and Hennessy's mare was known to be skittish around sudden sounds or movements. But several details troubled those who knew the couple well. Hennessy was an experienced horseman who had ridden that same route hundreds of times in all weather conditions. More puzzling was the horse's condition when it returned. The animal showed signs of extreme agitation that seemed excessive for a simple fall. Most disturbing of all was Bridget's reaction. While her grief appeared genuine, her immediate concern seemed to focus on practical matters, securing Hennessy's will, consolidating his assets, and ensuring that his legal arrangements for the farm remained intact. The funeral drew hundreds of mourners. Thomas Hennessy had been well respected in Lancaster County legal circles, and his sudden death shocked the community. Bridget played the role of grieving widow perfectly, accepting condolences with appropriate tears and dignity. But those closest to the family noticed that her sisters seemed less like mourners and more like supporters of a woman who had successfully completed a difficult task. Within a month of the funeral, Catherine Brennan began accepting social invitations from Hamilton Crawford, the most successful banker in Lancaster County. The Crawford courtship followed a pattern that would become disturbingly familiar to anyone paying close attention to the Brennan sisters' romantic lives. Hamilton Crawford was a practical man in his late 30s, a Scottish Presbyterian who had converted to Catholicism to marry his first wife, deceased 3 years earlier from childbed fever. His bank held mortgages on half the farms in Lancaster County, and his personal wealth rivaled that of Philadelphia's merchant princes. Catherine approached Crawford with a combination of vulnerability and strength that proved irresistible to a man who had spent 3 lonely years burying himself in ledger books and loan documents. She would appear at his bank on Tuesday afternoons, ostensibly to discuss the family's financial arrangements following Thomas Hennessy's death. But their conversations gradually shifted from business to personal matters. "I worry about my sisters," Catherine confided during one of these meetings, her voice carrying just the right note of concern. "Bridget is still mourning, of course, but Margaret and Sarah, they need guidance, protection. A woman alone in this world faces so many dangers." Crawford, who had no siblings and had often wondered what family loyalty might feel like, found himself drawn to Catherine's devotion to her sisters. Here was a woman who understood that blood ties transcended all other considerations, a rare quality in his experience. Their engagement, announced in August 1838, surprised no one who had observed Crawford's transformation from grieving widower to besotted suitor. The wedding took place in October, exactly 1 year after Patrick Brennan's death and 7 months after Thomas Hennessy's funeral. Crawford moved into the farmhouse, bringing with him not only his considerable wealth, but also his expertise in financial management. Like Hennessy before him, he restructured the property arrangements to provide additional security for all 4 sisters, never questioning Catherine's insistence that the family remain together. But Hamilton Crawford was a more methodical man than Thomas Hennessy had been, and his banker's instincts led him to notice patterns that a lawyer might miss. Within weeks of the wedding, he began keeping a private journal, recording observations that would prove prophetic. November 3rd, 1838. Catherine insists on maintaining separate accounts for each sister's inheritance from father. Says it's temporary until they all marry, but Margaret shows no interest in suitors despite obvious beauty. Sarah actively discourages men who call on her, beginning to suspect they have no intention of marrying. November 18th, 1838. Bridget visited bank today to discuss investment opportunities. Her knowledge of compound interest and property values exceeds that of most businessmen. Asked detailed questions about inheritance laws, specifically regarding widows' rights in cases of intestate death. Claimed academic curiosity, but conversation felt calculated. December 1st, 1838. Overheard conversation between Catherine and Margaret about maintaining unity and protecting the legacy. When they noticed me listening, quickly changed subject to Christmas preparations. Growing convinced that sisters have made some kind of pact regarding property. December 15th, 1838. Catherine has become distant, mechanical in her affections. Shows more interest in discussing business than in normal marital relations. When I mentioned possibility of starting our own family, her reaction was cold, almost hostile. "The 4 of us are family enough," she said. Crawford's suspicions deepened when he discovered that Margaret had begun receiving regular visits from Judge Cornelius Whitman, the circuit judge who presided over Lancaster County's most important legal cases. Whitman was a distinguished man in his 50s, a widower with grown children who lived in Philadelphia. He was also the judge who would oversee any legal challenges to the Brennan family's property arrangements. The banker's training had taught him to recognize patterns, and the pattern emerging around the Brennan sisters troubled him deeply. But Hamilton Crawford had made a crucial error in his analysis. He assumed that recognizing a conspiracy would be enough to protect him from becoming its next victim. The second death occurred on February 8, 1839, during one of the coldest winters in Lancaster County memory. Crawford had taken to walking the property boundaries each morning, partly for exercise and partly to inspect the farm's winter preparations. The Mill Creek, which formed the northern border of the Brennan property, had frozen solid for the first time in decades, creating what appeared to be safe passage across the water. Crawford's body was discovered by a neighbor searching for stray cattle. The banker had apparently attempted to cross the creek on the ice, which had given way under his weight, plunging him into the frigid water below. The current had carried him nearly a quarter-mile downstream before his body became wedged against a fallen log. Death by drowning, complicated by exposure to the extreme cold, exactly what one would expect from such an accident. But Crawford had left behind his journal, hidden in his personal safe at the bank. The final entry, dated February 7th, revealed the depth of his suspicions. "Catherine knows I suspect something. Her behavior has become increasingly erratic. She insists on accompanying me everywhere, claims she's worried about my safety, but her concern feels more like surveillance. Have decided to confront her tomorrow about my suspicions regarding Thomas Hennessy's death. If something happens to me, look to the sisters. They are not what they seem." Dr. McAllister, who had examined Thomas Hennessy's body the previous year, found Crawford's death equally straightforward from a medical perspective. Drowning in icy water was a common winter hazard in rural Pennsylvania. The ice on Mill Creek, while appearing solid, had been weakened by an underground spring that created unpredictable thin spots. Crawford's body showed no signs of violence, no defensive wounds, no indication that his death was anything other than a tragic accident. Catherine's grief seemed as genuine as Bridget's had been, but observers noted that both widows appeared more concerned with practical matters than with emotional devastation. Within days of Crawford's funeral, they were meeting with lawyers and bank officials, ensuring that the family's financial security remained intact. The pattern was becoming clear to anyone willing to see it. But in a community that respected the sanctity of marriage and the tragedy of young widowhood, few were prepared to voice their suspicions aloud. Margaret Brennan's engagement to Judge Cornelius Whitman was announced 6 weeks after Hamilton Crawford's funeral. Judge Cornelius Whitman represented the pinnacle of Lancaster County society, a man whose legal decisions affected thousands of lives and whose social position opened doors throughout Pennsylvania. At 53, he commanded respect in courtrooms from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, and his appointment to the circuit court had been seen as a stepping stone to higher judicial positions, possibly even the state Supreme Court. Margaret's pursuit of the judge demonstrated a sophistication that surpassed even her sister's previous campaigns. Rather than the direct approach Catherine had used with Crawford or the intellectual partnership Bridget had cultivated with Hennessy, Margaret employed what could only be described as a campaign of strategic vulnerability. She first appeared in Whitman's courtroom in March 1839, ostensibly seeking advice about property law related to her father's estate. Her beauty was undeniable, but what captured Whitman's attention was her apparent innocence regarding legal matters, combined with an intelligence that made her questions unexpectedly perceptive. She seemed like a sheltered flower who nonetheless possessed a keen understanding of the world around her. "I'm afraid I don't understand these inheritance complications, Your Honor," she said during their first private conversation, her blue eyes wide with apparent confusion. "My sisters and I simply want to honor our father's wishes, but the law seems designed to destroy families rather than protect them." Whitman, who had spent decades dealing with grasping relatives and contested wills, found Margaret's family loyalty refreshing. Here was a young woman who put blood ties above personal ambition, who sought legal guidance not for personal gain, but to protect her sister's welfare. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond legal matters to encompass literature, philosophy, and the judge's own experiences with loss. His wife had died 5 years earlier, and his children had scattered to distant cities, leaving him increasingly isolated. Margaret's strategy was patience itself. She never pushed for personal meetings, never suggested romantic interest, never appeared to be anything other than a grateful young woman seeking a respected elder's guidance. But somehow, Whitman found himself looking forward to her visits, planning his schedule around their conversations and gradually opening his heart to someone who seemed to understand his loneliness without taking advantage of it. The engagement announcement in May 1839 shocked Lancaster County society more than the previous marriages had. Judge Whitman was a pillar of respectability, a man whose judgment was considered unimpeachable. That he would marry the third Brennan sister, following the convenient deaths of her sister's husbands, struck many observers as either remarkably coincidental or remarkably suspicious. But Whitman himself seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. Margaret brought light into his austere life, filling his house with laughter and warmth. She showed genuine interest in his work, intelligent curiosity about legal precedents, and a remarkable ability to remember details about cases and colleagues. More importantly, she shared his growing concern about the suspicious pattern of deaths surrounding her family. "I worry about my sisters," Margaret confided to Whitman 2 weeks before their wedding. "Bridget and Catherine have been different since their husbands died. More secretive, more intense about keeping the family together. Sometimes I feel like they're planning something, but I can't imagine what." This conversation would later be remembered as either Margaret's attempt to distance herself from her sister's conspiracy or as the most calculating manipulation of all, using Whitman's own suspicions to absolve herself of guilt while positioning herself as an unwitting victim of her sister's schemes. The wedding took place in July 1839, a smaller affair than the previous ceremonies, partly out of respect for the recent deaths and partly due to growing whispers about the Brennan family's unusual luck in love and loss. Whitman moved into the farmhouse like his predecessors, though he insisted on maintaining his own residence in town for professional purposes. This arrangement meant he spent weekdays at the farm and returned to Lancaster for court sessions. The judge's legal training made him a more careful observer than either Hennessy or Crawford had been. Within a month of his marriage, he began documenting disturbing patterns of behavior that his predecessors had either missed or dismissed. His private notes, discovered years later, revealed a man growing increasingly convinced that he had married into a conspiracy. August 10th, 1839. "Margaret insists on knowing my schedule in advance, claims she wants to plan meals and social events accordingly. But her questions seem more focused on when I'll be traveling alone than on domestic arrangements." August 25th, 1839. Overheard Bridget and Catherine discussing the final arrangement and completing the plan. When I entered room, they immediately changed subject. Margaret's reaction was odd. She seemed frightened rather than curious. September 2nd, 1839, found Margaret examining my will and insurance documents. She claimed she was trying to understand legal terminology, but her questions were surprisingly sophisticated, beginning to suspect she knows more about law than she pretends. September 15th, 1839, direct confrontation with Margaret about my suspicions regarding her sisters. Her response was immediate tears and protests of innocence, but something about her reaction felt rehearsed. Either she's a victim of her sister's schemes or a better actress than I imagined. Judge Whitman's position gave him access to information that his predecessors had lacked. He quietly began investigating the deaths of Thomas Hennessy and Hamilton Crawford, requesting copies of coroner reports and interviewing witnesses. What he discovered disturbed him deeply. Both men had died at times when they were known to be in conflict with their wives about leaving Lancaster County. Both deaths had occurred under circumstances that, while appearing accidental, showed evidence of careful timing and opportunity. Most troubling of all, both men had made recent changes to their wills that heavily favored their wives and by extension the entire Brennan family. But Whitman's investigation revealed something else. He was not the only person asking questions about the Brennan sisters. A private investigator named Daniel Murphy had been making quiet inquiries around Lancaster County, claiming to represent interested parties who were concerned about the pattern of deaths. Murphy's questions focused on the sisters' financial arrangements, their relationships with local business leaders, and their future marriage plans. When Whitman attempted to contact Murphy directly, he discovered that the investigator had already left Lancaster County, but not before interviewing several key witnesses and requesting copies of public records related to the Brennan property. Someone outside the family was beginning to piece together the truth about the sisters' conspiracy. On October 30th, 1839, Judge Whitman made the decision that would save or damn him. He confronted Margaret directly about his discoveries and demanded to know the truth about her sister's involvement in their husbands' deaths. Margaret's response would determine whether the fourth Brennan sister was a co-conspirator or simply another victim of her family's ruthless determination to stay together. The confrontation between Judge Whitman and Margaret took place in the farmhouse parlor on a rain-soaked evening when Catherine and Sarah had traveled to Lancaster town for supplies, leaving the newlyweds alone for the first time in weeks. Whitman had planned the timing carefully, understanding that his wife's behavior changed dramatically when her sisters were present versus when they were apart. "Margaret," he began, his voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench, "I know what your sisters have done. The question now is whether you're their accomplice or their next victim." Margaret's reaction was immediate and visceral. She collapsed into a chair, her face draining of color, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her mouth. For several minutes she said nothing, staring at her husband with an expression that combined terror, relief, and something that might have been gratitude. "I've been waiting for someone to figure it out," she finally whispered. "I've been praying that someone would stop them before they make me do what they did." What followed was a confession that revealed the true scope of the Brennan sisters' conspiracy. According to Margaret, the plan had been Bridget's creation, conceived during those candlelit conversations following their father's funeral. The eldest sister had calculated that 4 strategic marriages, followed by 4 convenient deaths, would not only keep the family property intact, but would also create a financial empire that could support them in luxury for the rest of their lives. "Bridget said we had to think like men," Margaret revealed, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. She said men use violence and politics to get what they want, but women have to be smarter, more patient. She said if we did it right, no one would ever suspect us because people see what they expect to see. Grieving widows, not calculating killers. The confession revealed the disturbing efficiency of the sisters' methods. Each death had been meticulously planned months in advance, with contingencies for different scenarios and careful attention to creating plausible accidents. Bridget had studied Thomas Hennessy's daily routines for weeks before his death, noting his route to town, his horse's temperament, and the weather patterns that might provide cover for their actions. She drugged his coffee that morning, Margaret revealed. Something that would make him dizzy, disoriented, but would be gone from his system by the time anyone examined his body. Then she spooked his horse deliberately, threw a stone at the exact moment he was riding past the steepest part of the road. Hamilton Crawford's death had required more elaborate preparation. Catherine had spent weeks studying the ice patterns on Mill Creek, identifying the exact location where underground springs created unpredictable weak spots. On the morning of his death, she had used heated iron rods to weaken the ice further, creating a trap that would appear completely natural. She walked with him that morning, Margaret continued, tears now flowing freely. She insisted on accompanying him to check the property boundaries, something she'd never done before. She guided him to exactly the right spot on the ice, then stepped aside just as it gave way. She said later that she had to hold his head under the water for nearly a minute, but the cold made him weak, so he couldn't fight her effectively. But Margaret's most shocking revelation concerned her own role in the conspiracy. She had not been an unwitting victim of her sister's schemes. She had been their reluctant accomplice from the beginning. Bridget and Catherine had made it clear that her cooperation was not optional, that the family's survival depended on all four sisters playing their assigned roles. They told me that if I refused, they would make it appear that I had been the killer all along, she explained. Bridget said it would be easy to plant evidence suggesting that I had murdered Thomas and Hamilton out of jealousy or greed. They said no one would believe that three sisters could work together so efficiently, but everyone would believe that one sister had gone mad with jealousy. Judge Whitman listened to this confession with growing horror, not only at the crimes being described, but at the realization that his own death had been planned with the same methodical precision. Margaret revealed that his murder was scheduled for November 15, 1839, less than 3 weeks away. The method would be poisoning, using a slow-acting toxin that would mimic the symptoms of a heart attack, a plausible cause of death for a man of his age and professional stress level. Sarah has been practicing with different doses, Margaret revealed. She's been testing them on stray cats and dogs, finding the right amount that would kill quickly enough to prevent recovery, but slowly enough to seem natural. Bridget said your death had to be perfect because you're too prominent for people to accept another convenient accident. But Whitman's investigation had uncovered another disturbing element of the conspiracy: the involvement of Daniel Murphy, the private investigator who had been asking questions around Lancaster County. According to Margaret, Murphy was not working for interested parties, as he had claimed. He was working for the Brennan sisters themselves, hired to identify anyone who might be getting too close to the truth about their crimes. Bridget wanted to know if anyone suspected us, Margaret explained. She said we needed to stay ahead of any investigations to know what people were saying and thinking. Murphy reports back to her every week with the names of anyone who's asking questions about our family. This revelation meant that Whitman's own investigation was known to the sisters, that his suspicions had been reported back to them, and that his confrontation with Margaret might itself be part of their larger plan. Perhaps Margaret's confession was genuine, or perhaps it was an elaborate manipulation designed to make him lower his guard at the crucial moment. "How do I know you're telling the truth now?" Whitman demanded. "How do I know this isn't just another layer of deception?" Margaret's response would determine not only Whitman's fate, but also whether the Brennan sisters' conspiracy would finally be exposed or would claim its fourth and final victim. She walked to the parlor desk, opened a locked drawer with a key she wore around her neck, and withdrew a leather-bound journal filled with handwritten pages. "This contains everything," she said, placing the journal in Whitman's hands. "Every detail of every murder, every plan, every conversation. I've been documenting it all since Thomas's death, thinking that someday I might need proof of what really happened." As Whitman began reading, the sound of approaching horses announced the return of Catherine and Sarah from their trip to town. Margaret's eyes met her husband's with an expression of desperate urgency. "They can't know that I've told you," she whispered. "If they suspect that you know the truth, they'll kill you tonight." The journal that Margaret placed in Judge Whitman's hands contained 3 years of meticulous documentation that transformed the Brennan sisters from suspected criminals into confirmed monsters. Written in Margaret's careful script, the pages detailed not only the murders of Thomas Hennessy and Hamilton Crawford, but also the systematic planning that had preceded each death and the cold calculation that had followed. The first entry, dated November 15, 1836, exactly 1 month after Patrick Brennan's funeral, revealed the moment when grief transformed into something far more dangerous. Bridget has presented us with a choice that isn't really a choice at all. We can watch father's legacy be destroyed by inheritance laws, scattered to creditors and tax collectors until nothing remains of 37 years of work, or we can take control of our own destiny. She says that women throughout history have used marriage as a weapon, but we'll be the first to use widowhood as a strategy. 4 marriages, 4 deaths, 4 fortunes. By the time we're finished, we'll own half of Lancaster County. Subsequent entries documented the sisters' transformation from grieving daughters into calculating predators. They studied potential targets like military strategists, evaluating each man's wealth, social position, personal habits, and vulnerabilities. Thomas Hennessy had been selected not only for his legal expertise, but also for his loneliness. A widower desperate for companionship would be more likely to make hasty emotional decisions about marriage and inheritance. December 3rd, 1836. Bridget says we must never allow ourselves to feel guilty about what we're planning. These men will die happy, believing themselves loved and cherished. Their deaths will be quick and relatively painless, far more merciful than the slow starvation that awaits us if we lose the farm. She says we're not murderers, we're survivors, using the only weapons available to women in a world designed to destroy us. But the journal also revealed the psychological toll of their conspiracy. Margaret's entries grew increasingly disturbed as the plan progressed from theoretical discussion to actual implementation. March 16, 1838. Thomas is dead, and Bridget shows no more emotion than if she had slaughtered a chicken for dinner. She told me that the hardest part was pretending to grieve at the funeral, not because she felt guilt, but because she was actually proud of how perfectly the murder had been executed. I think my sister may be genuinely mad, but I'm too frightened of her to resist. The journal documented how each sister's personality had been weaponized for their conspiracy. Bridget served as the mastermind, using her intelligence to plan each murder and her ruthlessness to ensure that no detail was overlooked. Catherine functioned as the emotional manipulator, able to read men's weaknesses and exploit them with surgical precision. Sarah had become their information gatherer and, when necessary, their executioner. Her youthful appearance and sweet voice making her the perfect person to administer poison without arousing suspicion. Margaret's role, according to her own documentation, was that of the reluctant accomplice who provided legitimacy to their conspiracy. Her genuine distress and apparent innocence made it impossible for observers to believe that all four sisters could be equally guilty. She served as their unwitting alibi, the sister whose obvious discomfort with the situation convinced people that at least one member of the family was innocent. July 20th, 1839. Cornelius grows more suspicious each day, asking questions about Thomas and Hamilton that I cannot answer without revealing the truth. Bridget says this was always part of the plan, that my marriage to a judge would eventually force us to be more careful, but would also give us protection from legal prosecution. Who would believe that a woman would confess murder to her own husband, she asked. And if he tries to expose us, who would believe that a judge's own wife had fooled him so completely? As Whitman read these passages, the sound of horses approaching the farmhouse grew louder, accompanied by his wife's voice calling out cheerful greetings to the farmhands. He had perhaps minutes to decide how to respond to Margaret's revelations before Catherine and Sarah returned to the house and the opportunity for private conversation disappeared. The journal's final entries revealed the most disturbing element of the conspiracy. It was never intended to end with 4 deaths. Bridget had been planning additional murders, targeting other wealthy men in Lancaster County who could provide the sisters with even greater wealth and influence. The 4 husbands had been only the beginning of a campaign that could have continued indefinitely. October 25, 1839. Bridget has been meeting with Murphy, the investigator, about expanding our activities to neighboring counties. She says we could create a network of widows, all working together to systematically eliminate wealthy men throughout Pennsylvania. She envisions a future where women like us control significant portions of the state's wealth, using marriage and murder as tools of revolution against male dominance. But the journal also contained information that could save Whitman's life and expose the conspiracy. Detailed descriptions of where evidence had been hidden, how the murders had been committed, and most importantly, when and how his own death was planned to occur. According to Margaret's documentation, his murder was scheduled for November 15th, exactly 2 weeks away. Sarah had been testing dosages of foxglove extract, a poison that would cause symptoms mimicking heart failure. The The toxin would be administered through his evening brandy, a ritual that had become part of his daily routine since moving to the farmhouse. November 1st, 1839. Sarah has perfected the dosage. 3 drops will cause chest pains and difficulty breathing within an hour, followed by cardiac arrest within 4 hours. The symptoms will be indistinguishable from natural heart failure, and the toxin will be undetectable in his system within 24 hours. Bridget says my performance as the grieving widow will be crucial. I must appear devastated, but not surprised, since everyone knows about the stress of Cornelius's judicial responsibilities. As Catherine and Sarah's voices grew closer to the house, Whitman made the most important decision of his career. He closed the journal, looked into Margaret's terrified eyes, and whispered the words that would either save them both or ensure their mutual destruction. Tomorrow morning, I'm riding to Philadelphia to meet with federal investigators. You're coming with me, and you're going to tell them everything you've told me tonight. Margaret's response revealed whether she was truly seeking redemption or was simply playing the final card in her sister's elaborate game. They'll kill us both before we reach the county line. Bridget has been planning for this possibility since the day we started. She has men watching the roads, people who owe her favors, ways of making deaths look accidental, even when victims are trying to escape. The front door opened with a cheerful creak as Catherine and Sarah entered the house, their voices bright with the false warmth that had become their trademark since the murders began. Margaret quickly concealed the journal beneath her shawl, while Whitman arranged his features into an expression of casual interest in his wife's activities. "Cornelius! Margaret!" Catherine called out, her footsteps approaching the parlor. "You'll never guess what we discovered in town. Mrs. Henderson at the dry goods store has been spreading the most interesting rumors about our family's extraordinary luck with marriage." Sarah's laughter echoed from the hallway, musical and innocent as always. She suggested that perhaps we Brennan women possessed some sort of supernatural charm over men. If only she knew how right she was, though not in the way she imagines. Whitman felt his blood chill at the casual cruelty in Sarah's voice. These women spoke of murder with the same tone other people might use to discuss the weather or the price of grain. Margaret's hand found his beneath the table, her fingers trembling with what he hoped was genuine fear rather than calculated performance. "What did you tell Mrs. Henderson?" Margaret asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror in her eyes. Catherine appeared in the parlor doorway, her smile radiant and predatory. "I told her that the Brennan women have always understood the importance of taking care of the men we love. We make sure they never want for anything, never have reason to be unhappy, and never have to worry about growing old and burdensome." The implication was clear enough to make Whitman's hands clench involuntarily. These women viewed murder not as a crime, but as a form of mercy, a way of preserving their victims' happiness by ensuring they died while still beloved and prosperous. It was a rationalization so twisted that it revealed the true depth of their madness. Sarah entered the parlor carrying a tea service, her movements graceful and domestic. "I thought we might enjoy some refreshment while we discuss the wonderful news Catherine and I heard in town. Judge Whitman, you'll be particularly interested in this information given your professional responsibilities." The emphasis on his title carried an undertone of mockery that suggested the sisters knew exactly how much he had discovered about their activities. Whitman realized that Daniel Murphy, their private investigator, had probably reported his every question, every inquiry, every moment of suspicion back to Bridget and her co-conspirators. "What news would that be?" Whitman asked, accepting a cup of tea while trying to calculate whether the liquid might already contain the foxglove extract that would kill him. Catherine settled into her favorite chair, the same chair where she had planned Hamilton Crawford's murder 6 months earlier. "It seems that certain federal authorities have been making inquiries about unusual death rates among wealthy men in rural Pennsylvania counties. They're particularly interested in cases where young widows inherit substantial fortunes under suspicious circumstances." The words hit Whitman like a physical blow. If federal investigators were already looking into the pattern of deaths, his own investigation might be redundant. But it also meant that the sisters knew they were under scrutiny from sources beyond local gossip and county officials. Sarah continued the revelation with her characteristic sweet smile. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that a gentleman from Philadelphia has been asking questions about our family specifically. He wanted to know about the circumstances of Thomas's and Hamilton's deaths, about our financial arrangements, and about your own marriage to Margaret. Did Mrs. Henderson provide this gentleman with information? Whitman asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Oh, yes, Catherine replied cheerfully. She told him everything she knew, which unfortunately includes quite a bit of speculation and rumor, along with the actual facts. But you know how these federal investigators are, Cornelius. They have ways of separating truth from gossip, especially when they find patterns that suggest organized criminal activity. Margaret's grip on Whitman's hand tightened to the point of pain. The sisters were telling them that their time had run out, that federal authorities were closing in on their conspiracy, and that the planned timeline for Whitman's murder had been moved up dramatically. Bridget's voice echoed from the kitchen, calling for her sisters to join her for a private conversation. Catherine and Sarah excused themselves with apologetic smiles, leaving the married couple alone in the parlor, with the understanding that their privacy was temporary and probably illusory. "They're going to kill you tonight," Margaret whispered the moment her sisters left the room. The federal investigation has forced their hand. They can't wait until November 15th if investigators are already asking questions about suspicious deaths. Whitman studied his wife's face, searching for any sign of deception. Everything about Margaret's behavior suggested genuine terror, but he had seen how convincingly the Brennan sisters could lie when their survival depended on it. Was this conversation another manipulation designed to make him trust her completely before she administered the poison herself? "How do I know you're not part of this final performance?" he asked quietly. "How do I know that your confession, your fear, your journal aren't all part of an elaborate plan to make me lower my guard?" Margaret's response was to reach beneath her shawl and withdraw a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. "This is the foxglove extract that Sarah has been preparing. I was supposed to put 3 drops in your evening brandy tonight, wait for you to collapse, then call for Dr. McAllister to confirm your death from heart failure." She placed the vial in Whitman's palm, her eyes never leaving his face. "If I were still part of their conspiracy, I would have already administered the poison. The fact that I'm giving it to you instead should prove where my loyalties lie." The sound of intense conversation drifted from the kitchen, too muffled for specific words, but clear enough to indicate that the 3 sisters were engaged in urgent planning. Whitman realized that he and Margaret had perhaps minutes to decide on a course of action before the final phase of the conspiracy began. "There's something else," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. "The journal I showed you isn't the only evidence. Bridget has been keeping detailed financial records of everything we've stolen, every property transaction, every inheritance we've manipulated. She calls it insurance, in case we ever need to prove our value to potential allies or blackmail anyone who threatens us." "Where are these records kept?" "Hidden in Father's old desk in the cellar, behind a false panel that only Bridget knows about. But I've been watching her, learning her secrets, preparing for this moment when I would have to choose between my sisters and my soul." The conversation from the kitchen grew louder, and Whitman could distinguish Bridget's voice, giving what sounded like final instructions to Catherine and Sarah. Whatever they were planning, it was about to begin. "We leave now," Whitman decided. "Through the back door, take my horse, ride to Lancaster town and straight to the federal authorities. Let your sisters explain to investigators why their co-conspirator and their 4th victim disappeared in the middle of the night." But as they moved toward the back of the house, Sarah's voice called out from the kitchen with artificial sweetness. "Margaret, dear, could you and Cornelius join us for a moment? Bridget has something important she'd like to discuss with both of you." It was a summons, not a request. and they both understood that refusing would immediately reveal that their private conversation had uncovered the conspiracy. Margaret looked at her husband with an expression that combined love, terror, and desperate hope. "If we walk into that kitchen," she whispered, "we may never walk out alive." Judge Cornelius Whitman had spent 27 years making decisions that affected other people's lives, but none had ever carried the weight of the choice he faced on November 1st, 1839. He could walk into the kitchen where 3 murderesses waited with their final trap, or he could attempt an escape that might save his life, but would leave the Brennan sisters free to continue their killing spree in other counties, other states, wherever their twisted ambition might take them. The decision was made for him by the sound of multiple horses approaching the farmhouse at high speed. Through the parlor window, Whitman could see torches burning in the darkness, too many riders for a casual visit, and moving with too much purpose for a social call. Someone was coming to the Brennan farm with official business, and that someone had brought enough men to handle resistance. "Federal marshals," Margaret breathed, recognizing the organized movement of law enforcement, even in the darkness. "They're here." From the kitchen came the sound of frantic activity, chairs scraping, cabinet doors slamming, urgent whispered conversations. The Brennan sisters had also seen the approaching riders and were implementing whatever emergency plan they had prepared for this exact situation. Bridget appeared in the parlor doorway, her usual composed demeanor replaced by cold efficiency. "Cornelius, Margaret, we need to discuss our story before those men reach the house. There are certain explanations that will serve all of our interests, and certain truths that would benefit no one." Even facing imminent arrest, Bridget Brennan attempted to control the narrative, to find some way of turning the situation to her advantage. Whitman realized that this woman would continue manipulating people and circumstances until the moment they placed a noose around her neck. "I think not," Whitman replied, standing and placing himself between his wife and her sister. "Margaret and I will tell the authorities exactly what happened here, and you'll have to answer for what you've done." Bridget's expression shifted from calculated calm to genuine fury, revealing for the first time the monster that had been hidden beneath years of careful performance. "You sanctimonious fool! Do you think your precious law will protect you from us? Do you think federal marshals care about the deaths of a few men when there are fortunes and reputations at stake? What do you mean?" Whitman demanded, though part of him already suspected the answer. Sarah appeared beside her eldest sister, her sweet face twisted into something ugly and vindictive. "Did you really think we operated without protection, without allies in high places? Did you imagine that 4 women could commit perfect murders for 3 years without someone in authority looking the other way?" The implication was staggering. The Brennan sisters' conspiracy had been protected by corruption that reached far beyond Lancaster County. Someone with significant power had been shielding them from investigation, probably in exchange for a share of their stolen wealth or for services yet to be rendered. Catherine joined her sisters in the doorway, blocking any escape route toward the kitchen. "Judge Whitman, you're about to learn that justice isn't blind, it's simply expensive. The men riding toward this house aren't coming to arrest us. They're coming to arrest you." Before Whitman could respond, the sound of boots on the front porch announced the arrival of their visitors. A heavy fist pounded on the door, followed by a voice that carried absolute authority. "Federal marshals, open this door immediately." Bridget smoothed her dress and arranged her features into an expression of feminine distress. "Remember, Cornelius, you're the one with access to legal documents, with the knowledge to forge inheritance papers, with the connections to arrange convenient accidents. Margaret is the traumatized victim who finally found the courage to expose her husband's crimes." The door opened before anyone could respond, and 6 armed men entered the farmhouse with weapons drawn and badges displayed. Their leader, a grizzled man in his 50s, surveyed the scene with experienced eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Marshal William Davies, United States Federal Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. Judge Cornelius Whitman, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and corruption in office." The words struck Whitman like physical blows. The sisters had somehow managed to frame him for their own crimes, turning his investigation against him and using his position as evidence of his guilt rather than his innocence. Margaret stepped forward, tears streaming down her face in what appeared to be genuine anguish. "Marshal Davies, you don't understand. My husband is innocent. My sisters are the ones who killed Thomas Hennessy and Hamilton Crawford. I have proof, evidence that will show you the truth." But Bridget was ready for this development, her voice carrying exactly the right note of sorrowful concern for a mentally unstable relative. "I'm afraid my sister has been under tremendous strain since her marriage. She's been making wild accusations, creating elaborate fantasies about murder conspiracies. Dr. McAllister can verify that Margaret has been showing signs of severe mental disturbance." Marshal Davies studied the four people before him with the careful attention of a man who had seen every form of deception imaginable. "Mrs. Whitman, we've received detailed testimony from a private investigator named Daniel Murphy, who claims to have evidence that you and your sisters systematically murdered your husbands for financial gain." The revelation that Murphy had turned against his employers shifted the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Margaret's face lit up with desperate hope, while her sisters exchanged glances of barely controlled panic. "Murphy has been working for us," Catherine said quickly. "We hired him to investigate suspicious deaths in the county because we were concerned about our own safety. If he's making accusations against us, he's clearly been corrupted by someone with an interest in destroying our family." But Marshal Davies wasn't finished with his revelations. Mr. Murphy provided us with detailed financial records showing systematic theft of property and assets following each death. He also gave us physical evidence, poison vials, forged documents, and correspondence that outlines the entire conspiracy. Sarah's composure finally cracked, her sweet mask sliding away to reveal the calculating killer beneath. Murphy was supposed to destroy that evidence. He promised us that everything would be eliminated if we paid him enough. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence, confirming everything that Margaret had revealed in her journal and everything that Whitman had suspected about his wife's family. Bridget shot her youngest sister a look of pure hatred, realizing that Sarah's outburst had doomed them all. "Additionally," Marshal Davies continued, "we have sworn testimony from Judge Whitman himself, provided through intermediaries over the past several weeks, documenting his discovery of the conspiracy and his attempts to gather evidence against the perpetrators." Whitman stared at the marshal in confusion. He had never provided testimony to federal authorities, had never contacted intermediaries, had only just discovered the full scope of the conspiracy that very evening. But then, understanding dawned. Margaret had been in contact with federal investigators, had been secretly cooperating with Murphy's investigation, had been working for weeks to expose her sister's crimes. "The journal," Margaret said quietly, producing the leather-bound book from beneath her shawl. "Everything is documented here. Every murder, every plan, every conversation. I've been gathering evidence since Thomas Hennessy's death, waiting for the right moment to bring justice for all the men my sisters killed." Bridget's final words as the marshals placed shackles on her wrists revealed the true depth of her twisted logic. "We saved those men from growing old, from becoming burdens to their families, from watching their fortunes disappear and their bodies fail. We gave them love and happiness right up until the moment they died. We were merciful killers. And history will remember us as women who refused to be victims of a system designed to destroy us." As the Brennan sisters were led away to face trial in Philadelphia, Judge Whitman realized that Margaret's courage in exposing the conspiracy had saved not only his life, but potentially dozens of other lives. The sisters had indeed been planning to expand their operations beyond Lancaster County, creating a network of murderous widows that could have operated for decades. The trial that followed became one of the most sensational criminal cases in Pennsylvania history. Bridget, Catherine, and Sarah Brennan were convicted on multiple counts of murder and conspiracy, becoming the first women in the state to be sentenced to death for such crimes. They were hanged together on March 15, 1841, exactly 3 years after Thomas Hennessy's murder. Margaret Brennan Whitman was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony and cooperation. She and her husband left Pennsylvania immediately after the trial, settling in Ohio under assumed names. The Brennan farm was sold to pay restitution to the victims' families, and the stone house that had sheltered so much evil was eventually demolished. But the story of the Brennan sisters had a final, disturbing chapter. Records discovered years later revealed that their conspiracy had indeed extended beyond Lancaster County. Similar patterns of suspicious deaths involving young widows were documented in Maryland, Virginia, and Delaware during the same period, suggesting that other women had adopted the Brennan model of marriage and murder. The case established legal precedents for investigating organized crime involving family members and demonstrated that evil could flourish behind facades of respectability and feminine virtue. It also raised questions about how many other such conspiracies might have operated undetected throughout American history, hidden by society's reluctance to believe that women could be capable of such calculated violence. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Lancaster County intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries, hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. The Brennan sisters' legacy lived on in the legal system's increased scrutiny of suspicious deaths involving inheritance and in the public's growing awareness that monsters could wear the faces of angels. Their story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming that traditional gender roles provided protection against criminal behavior. Today, the site of the Brennan farm is occupied by a shopping center, and few residents of modern Lancaster County know the dark history of the land beneath their feet. But occasionally, when local historians discuss the area's past, someone will mention the 4 sisters who refused to be separated and the 4 men who died for their twisted vision of family loyalty. This mystery shows us that evil often hides behind familiar faces, and that the most dangerous criminals are those who understand how to exploit society's expectations and assumptions. The Brennan sisters succeeded for years, precisely because no one wanted to believe that 4 women could be capable of such systematic brutality. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or might there have been other victims we never discovered? Could similar conspiracies be operating even today, hidden behind facades of respectability and family devotion? Leave your comment below with your theories about the Brennan sisters and their crimes. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. The darkness of history holds many secrets, and we're here to uncover them all. See you in the next video.